Do you wake up thinking, how can I sell more books or courses? How can I get more traffic to my website? How can I get more eyeballs on my offers? How can I find my ideal clients or customers? When Dodge Woodall was recommended to me in April 2020, his Bournemouth Sevens Festival had just been cancelled. They simply couldn't take the risk of going ahead when lockdowns might still be in force, as the first one had already gone way beyond 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This one 3-day event was what powered Dodge's business and finances. His family and team relied on the festival taking place to pay the bills all year round. 30,000 people attended every year, and it wasn't just the entry fees at stake. It was the sponsorship, it was the stands fees, it was the programme advertising bought by brands wanting to reach those 30,000 people. Dodge had an idea to start a training course for people who wanted to run festivals, and his mum, the legendary Anne-Marie Woodall, aka the high-heeled healer, recommended him to me, as she knew I was the person to talk to about getting that idea up and running. Now, while Dodge had 20 plus years events experience and a bulging address book from his years in the events industry, all of his intellectual capital was tied up in his head. He had an email list of festival goers who were also sports fanatics, but apart from that, as we started working together with weekly calls and voice note messages in between, it became obvious to me that what Dodge needed most while he worked on creating the content for his course was an audience. The other thing he needed was a way to make his contacts an offer they couldn't refuse. It needed to be a win-win. The idea was that they would come and help create specialist content for his course, and he'd put them in front of his brand new audience. Except he didn't have one yet. Dodge had just come off a 1-year social media retreat. He'd deleted all his accounts 1 year before and had not posted once. The audience and mailing list for the festival were not the same people who would buy the course. I knew that the fastest, easiest, cheapest way to create a specialist audience is to start a podcast. Dodge had only barely heard of podcasts and had never actually listened to one. I sent him off to listen to some Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett of Diary of a CEO, and Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom. We spent quite a bit of time talking about what the podcast could feature and how it could be structured. Dodge was a bit hesitant about placing himself front and centre, but I reassured him that he didn't have to be the expert, even though he was an expert. He just needed to have a great conversation with his guests, ask the questions everyone else is thinking, dig deep on the emotional side too. Luckily, he wasn't afraid of that. Find out what it really takes to be a great event organiser. Discover the real stories, the hair-raising moments, the disasters averted. One member of his team could help, the rest were too tied up cancelling the festival, dealing with acts, refunds, etc. Luckily, that one team member was a podcast fan and was very enthusiastic. He started attending our discussions too. What will happen if I start one of these podcast things, Nick? He asked me at one point. Dodge is pretty much the only person allowed to call me Nick, by the way. I don't know, Dodge, but something will. Something always does for the people who start a podcast and just keep going, I replied. They set up a great-looking makeshift podcast studio in the cellar of his office and got to work pulling in some contacts to interview to get the podcast going. They interspersed these episodes with ones where Dodge told his story and shared some yarns from behind the scenes at his previous events. I said it would get easier once he had something to show people, and sure enough it did. In the first 8 weeks, his podcast, The Eventful Entrepreneur, went straight to number 4 in Apple Podcasts. They later changed the name to Eventful Lives. That enabled them to interview many more different kinds of guests. Almost more exciting than that was that a local Bournemouth resident had just had a load of money thrown at him to start a podcast, and he was recommended to Dodge as someone who could help him. That aspiring podcaster was none other than Harry Redknapp, football manager and I'm a Celebrity Jungle winner. Dodge gave Harry loads of advice in a corner of his studio and ended up being Harry's co-host, interviewing the likes of Rod Stewart, Piers Morgan, John Barnes the footballer, Frankie Dettori the jockey, Eddie Hearn the promoter. That raised Dodge's profile too, of course. Coming back to Eventful Lives, I had told him to make sure to video each recording session so that he could put them on YouTube once edited. And while I had to nudge him about that, he got it done a few months after launch of the audio version. I like to keep an eye on clients to make sure they do what they say they're going to do. It's so easy to forget stuff, especially when you're in the middle of a success tornado. As I record this in early February 2024, the Eventful Lives podcast has just topped 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. His silver plaque is on the way. Now that's an extra income stream not to be sniffed at. Dodge and his team has, of early February 2024, enjoyed 80 million views across all of his social media accounts. Do you think his events course, called the Event Crowd and certified with the Chartered Management Institute now, is getting enough visits to his website? Do you think he's getting enough eyeballs on the offer? I think so. Now, Dodge is one of my more spectacular success stories. I have several other clients who've achieved at different levels over the years: best-selling authors, e-commerce gurus, a Huna healing teacher, jazz singers, a virtual midwife, a cement specialist, a hydroponic wheatgrass grower. No expert is too out there for me. But there are many smaller success stories, no less meaningful to the entrepreneurs concerned, or to me. What sets those apart from the people who just fall away and disappear? Determination and resourcefulness. They don't give up, they just keep turning up. They keep asking questions because I don't know what they don't know until they get the answers they need. They take their expertise, determination, and resourcefulness and move every bloody obstacle to get it out into the world. But there is one secret quality that all the success stories I've worked with over the years have possessed. I'll be revealing that on Sunday morning in my brand new free training, Becoming a Better Entrepreneur. Let me know what you think of Dodge's story in the comments below, and I'll DM you the registration link to attend. Thanks for listening. I hope you're as inspired as I am.